Hello, good day, everyone. Thank you for joining. And today we are going to talk about shipping because either you are shipping or you are receiving, there are certain things it makes it easier to ship or receive. So we asked Dana, and she was gracious to present this webinar. Before that, I just want to take 5 minutes of your time to just give a brief history of Cocotown because there are always some people join who are not our customers, and we just want to give them a brief introduction. So we are not going to take too much of your time. So thank you for listening to me. And I'm Andal Balu, co-founder and president of Cocotown. And okay. So if you look at the parent company, it was founded in 1992, and we named it InnoConcepts because we wanted to be innovative and we wanted to sell very unique products. So even though we founded the company in 92, it took 2 years to figure out what exactly we want to sell. So then we started trading in a specialty innovative food processing machines, and we focused primarily on the South Indian market because these machines were made to help us making South Indian food. And then over the years, when customers buy the machines, if we don't recognize the name, because I'm from South India, so I know the names. So if there's somebody even with another name buy it, we usually call and find out what they are using, and we kept a data base of what is all used for. And then we also were unique when we started the business because we just not gave the warranty. We also made it easy for people to get the repairs and service in different parts of USA. So we had about 14 different service centers, and we used to have something called a grinder clinic. So we go there and teach the people who are selling our machines how to fix the machines and fix the machines for the people who are bringing it in. But when the recession hit in 2007 and 2008, we had to pivot. So we wanted to switch to an industry where we can make a positive social impact. So what we found also, we had three important sustainability goals. One is environment, and we wanted to make sure customers' business is sustainable, and agriculture. We had to support agriculture because we have a saying in our language: if the farmer doesn't put his foot in the mud, we cannot put our hand in the food. So we have to make sure the farmer is, the farming is sustainable and the farmer is compensated well. So when we look at all these things, we thought chocolate is the right avenue because before we came in, if people wanted to make chocolate, they had to have millions of dollars, huge facility, highly skilled people, and all those things. But we want changed everything. So we came up with the equipment, but then um, we also wanted to make sure not just selling machines. Our business is creating and empowering chocopreneurs around the world. So that's, this is like a small timeline picture of, when we started, which machine. So we started with the grinder or melanger. That's the one we took long time for processing it. We had to grind for 3 days. So people had to be MacGyvers before Cocotown came in if they want to do small batches. So we changed that. Now even farmers in remote regions of Amazon or Vanuatu, they can use our machines and make chocolate. And then right now with the pandemic, again we had to pivot, and now we are focusing more on education. Even though we had education in-house in US, not everybody could come, but the pandemic made it easy because the Zoom was available all over the world. Everybody got used to the webinars. So that's when we got all this information. So uh, we were also fortunate to have the contact with the industry specialist and the customers who are trailblazers and farmers, cooperatives, all these people who have a lot of knowledge, and also like people like Dr. Ogata and Dr. Darren who are in research, but they have so much knowledge and they were all willing to share their knowledge to the other people's benefit. So we thank you all for that. And also for the participants on this webinar today, because without you, these webinars will not be successful. So we are looking forward. The world is opening up, but we still want to be normal because still there are some countries there are restrictions. So we want the whole world to be normal again, so we can meet more people in person. But we will continue the virtual connection, because still I think this is a easier way to bring people from different countries. They can sit in their you know uh, office or in their house or anywhere, and then they can learn. And then we always want to end with loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all the beings everywhere in the universe be happy and free, and may the thoughts and actions and my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to the freedom for all. Thank you. Now I will hand over to Tarsa.
Thank you, Mrs. Balu, for the introduction to CocoTown, and welcome everyone to this edition of the Empowering Chocopreneurs webinar series. We're so glad to have you all with us. Usually we like to start with a little get to know our presenter question, a little bit of an interview. So I'm going to do that as well. Welcome, Donna. We're so glad you agreed to join us and share your knowledge about the ever exciting challenges and blessings of shipping. So my question for you is, first I want to say I love the title that you have, which is U.S. and Global Shipping Concierge. I think that says a lot about, concierge means that that you give special attention. And that leads me to my question, which is, how did you get into shipping, or where did your passion for this start? Because I think, concierge denotes a special, handling. So can you share with us so that we can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure, and thanks, Teresa. The way you put it, a challenge and a blessing is that's very good. It's exactly what shipping is, I think. Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Wise with InExpress. It's great to be here. And I do want to, before I answer your question, give a special shout out to Mrs. Balu and Teresa and Jay. They have been just an absolute joy to work with over these past few years. So yeah, Teresa, it's interesting. I spent a good part of my career as a consultant, working both in corporate environments. I worked with ad agencies, and I worked as a freelancer, specializing in helping customers grow. I was a growth strategist and helped develop strategies for growth, just 3 to 5 year plans based on research. And in doing that, after a while, I had the good fortune to be able to travel on behalf of my customers, especially my corporate customers all over the world. And I was doing presentations and conferences and trade shows. And in the process of that, I needed to ship my supplies, my demo equipment in advance. And I quickly learned how complex it can be. And at the time, even though my customers were very large companies and they had logistics departments to handle all of that for me, it still got messed up. A lot of times it got stuck in customs, or it got diverted or delayed. And so I learned a lot about that process. And so then fast forward to when I left corporate and I had the opportunity to buy this franchise and learned that it was focused on teaching. We really take an educational approach, and we hold our customers' hands along the way as much as they would like, as much as they want to learn, and help them guide through the supply chain and logistics process. Because I realized that if a big company has those types of hiccups, then what do the smaller entrepreneurs do when they have to ship things internationally or even domestically using multiple types of carriers? So I just love the opportunity to be able to be that concierge that would help to guide people, and in a way continue to leverage my consulting background in a new field.
Wow, great. Thank you so much for that. I hear in your story sort of a parallel to some of the Chocopreneurs' journey, moving from sort of a corporate environment to wanting to own their own business, and having a passion for that. and then a little bit of the Cocotown journey as well, wanting to, guide our customers and the community along the way as little or as much as they would like. So thank you for that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you, and thank you again, and see you at the end.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Well, some of the things we'll be covering today are just a very brief overview of the industry. We'll talk about packaging, both chocolate as well as machines. We'll talk about domestic, and by domestic, I mean shipping within the US, and then we'll talk about international shipping between countries, and then I'll also touch on insurance and the importance of it. So first of all, I want to applaud you all. You should be very excited and proud of yourselves, I'm sure you are, for choosing this amazing industry. As I was doing research on craft chocolate and the bean to bar chocolate market, I was amazed to learn that this is an excellent time to be in the business. So you probably already know, but I wanted to share these statistics that the industry overall, the global chocolate confectionery industry, is growing at a pretty fast clip. When you look at compound annual growth rate, the chocolate industry globally is growing at 4.9% year over year on average. However, when you zoom in and look at the craft chocolate industry, your specialty, the growth rate is more than twice that. You're growing at 11.22%. And there are lots and lots of factors that you are, I'm sure, familiar with that are driving that growth, but this is just a really exciting time to be in this business. So when you think of the global market, there are some regions of the world where the interest and the activity in market share is focused. So for instance, the blue bar that you're looking at compares 2019 to the orange colored bar, which is 2027. And you can see how much the growth has been concentrated in Europe, almost pretty much double in Europe in that time frame, more than double in North America, more than double in Asia, and also growing rapidly in the rest of the world. And excuse me, what I wanted to do is to focus on some of the factors that have driven this kind of growth. So for instance, if your business aspires to grow internationally, then I wanted to make sure you had tidbits of information that will help you streamline your shipping and logistics process to make it more cost effective, so that you can take advantage of customers and market opportunities in Europe, North America, and Asia. So whether you're shipping chocolate to consumers, to distributors, to wholesalers, or to retailers, even if you're shipping chocolate equipment, I wanted to make sure everything goes smoothly so that you know the things that you can control and the things that you can't control. So let's talk about a few of the trends in the chocolate craft industry. There are lots of trends, but I only picked out the ones that I think are specific to impacting your shipping process. So first of all, craft chocolate consumers are a lot less price sensitive than regular chocolate consumers. You probably already know this. They don't mind paying extra for quality product. And that's great. That's great for you if you're in the business of selling it. However, keep in mind that this lack of price sensitivity does not extend to the cost of shipping. And this holds for any kind of luxury or premium product in other industries as well. There's a lot of research that shows that even though people are willing to pay a premium for a product, they still want to get the best possible deal on their shipping. Another factor is that people are more focused on their health now than ever before. They want to eat cleanly, they want to eat organically, and this is great for you because your products are made without preservatives. However, that presents special and enormous challenges when it comes to shipping because you need to be able to guarantee that the chocolate will arrive fresh. The third thing is that people, more than ever before, care about the impact on the planet. And that applies not just to how your products are made, but how they're shipped and how they're packaged. They want to make sure that there's minimal negative impact on the planet. So there are cases where you will need to be able to answer those questions for your customers. And then lastly, the way your packaging looks, it has to be not only functional, but it also needs to differentiate you. It needs to be distinctive and be in keeping with your brand promise. So there's a lot that goes into making sure you keep up with these trends and also make decisions that make sense for your products. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that your products are perishable. There are huge opportunities in front of you, but let's dive into the way you package them. There's so many things to consider. For instance, from a safety perspective, you need to make sure your product, your chocolates are safe, meaning that they have to arrive fresh, they have to arrive unbroken, and you have to maintain the brand standard that you've promised, meaning that it needs to look the same when they get it at their door as the way it does online or in your marketing. In terms of freshness, all chocolates are not created equal. I've learned in preparing for this presentation, for instance, that the ingredients may vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and that may dictate certain differences in the ideal temperature for shipping. One thing that is a constant that all the experts agree is that you want to, before you package it for shipping, you want to make sure your chocolates have been refrigerated. And in some cases, if it doesn't degrade the quality of the chocolate, you may even be able to freeze it. But prior to shipping, again, you want to make sure that it's cold and at an ideal temperature because then it will maintain that temperature a lot more easily after you package it. You also want to make sure you always consider options for expedited shipping, because the longer it takes, when it passes from vehicles like trucks and it goes into warehouses, where almost every carrier uses warehouses and hubs, and then it goes either to an airport or a holding area. These places have all different temperatures, and there's too many opportunities for the food to degrade along the way. So you want to make sure that wherever possible, if you can afford it, that you look for opportunities for air shipping, especially if it's international versus ocean. However, if it's going within a country, don't always assume that air shipping is going to be faster than ground. A lot of times, and this is surprising, it's kind of counterintuitive, because a lot of times ground shipping might actually be quicker. It will go directly from your dock or from pickup into the truck, and then the truck very often can go directly to your customer. However, if you send it by air, it has to go from the truck to the warehouse, from the warehouse to the airport, and then on the plane, and then back to a warehouse and back on the truck. So every situation is different. Just make sure you get your carrier partner to be very, very transparent with you about what that transit is going to look like. You also want to think about humidity levels to keep your goods fresh. I'm sure many of you include those little humidity packs that are designed to reduce moisture in food, those are relatively inexpensive. And it's really important to keep the humidity down because it's not just the humidity inside your package, but it's, again, the humidity in the warehouse or in the truck that you have to consider. So with all that in mind, you also want to optimize the size of the package. A lot of times you might want to default to having larger packages because you think that your chocolates will be protected better if you put them in a really large package with lots and lots of padding. However, keep in mind that that may impact your shipping costs because most carriers use what they call volumetric or dimensional weight, which we'll get into in a minute, which means that you are not only charged for the weight of the package, but you're also charged for the size of the package. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And then lastly, when you think about ensuring that your chocolates will arrive safe, there are lots of things you can do inside the package, but you can also offer optional insurance to your customers. And that's just an added layer of protection, which we'll talk about later. The Wall Street Journal recently published an article, not just about craft chocolates, but they were talking about chocolate shipping in general, even companies like Hershey's, where they have found that on average, the cost of buying chocolate is much less than the cost of shipping chocolate, storing and shipping chocolate, which is terrible when you think about it, but it has to be figured into your growth strategy and your cost strategy. So for that reason, Hershey's, as well as lots of other companies, have begun not only being in the business of selling chocolate, but being in the business of actually selling the cooling packs and the foam containers and things like that, along with their chocolates, so that they can help protect them. So let's talk a little bit about temperature control. There are two ways to control temperature. One is to keep the heat out, and the other one is to keep cold in. And there are certain packaging systems that you can use to do one or the other or both. So as I mentioned, research shows that chocolate is maintained a lot more fresh if it's cold or frozen prior to being packaged. Some of the packaging tools you can use will vary according to the temperature that you need to maintain, which again is driven by the ingredients and also the cost that you're willing to put into it. But one option that's very common is those white styrofoam boxes. I'm sure you've seen. One of the biggest manufacturers of those styrofoam boxes is a company called Uline. You can go to uline.com or Uline, that's spelled ULINE.com. And it's a huge global company. They have some of the best prices for the styrofoam boxes, but there are also some local companies that ship and sell those styrofoam boxes. One thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure that the walls of the boxes are at least 1.5 inches thick in order to maintain the best type of freshness. You can also, now those boxes are relatively expensive, so other options are to put insulated liners inside of a regular cardboard box. Those liners are, less expensive. You can also get them with a minimum 1.5 inch thickness, and then you can cut them and size them to the box. So that's a little bit more flexible than having to buy certain size styrofoam boxes. There is air-filled insulation as an option from some box manufacturers. Those are very expensive. There are also insulated pads that you can buy and put inside the boxes. But one of the most common ways of maintaining a certain temperature is to use dry ice or ice packs. And they depend on the size and the amount of time that you will be shipping, your transit time. Now, keep in mind that if you use something like ice packs or dry ice, you need to be very careful about humidity and condensation inside of the box. For instance, all carriers require that your package be leak proof. If, and please make note, if it is in transit and a carrier notices that a box is leaking, if it's wet in any way, then they will literally pull that box off of the assembly line and they will repackage it because they cannot ship anything that's wet. So that's why you want to make sure nothing is leaking. And if they pull it off the assembly line, they will repackage it in their own packaging using their own judgment on insulation. And that in itself will delay the transit time of the shipping. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is not to make the package airtight. The chocolate needs to be able to breathe. You need to be able to let a little bit of air in and out. And the reason for that is because if it's airtight, it causes condensation inside of the package if it's not able to breathe. And that increases humidity. If the vapors that are created by the coldness are not allowed to escape, then in certain cases, if it's very airtight and you're using a lot of dry ice, it could actually explode. There are cases where there are situations where these packages have exploded. And then your package is ruined and it just will never get where it's meant to go. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that inside the US, the USDA has actually issued safe handling instructions that are specific to chocolate. And it says that chocolate must be delivered, if it's delivered by mail, it must be kept cold or at least room temperature upon arrival. So that is something that's dictated by the USDA. And I'm sure other countries, governmental food organizations might have similar guidelines. Now let's talk specifically about shipping with carriers, small packages with carriers like UPS and FedEx and even DHL. A lot of these carriers have begun to offer their own types of temperature control packaging. And it was really driven more so than food, it was driven by the medical industry. Medical supplies is probably the #1 type of small packages that need to be shipped either room temperature or temperature controlled or cold. And for that reason, both FedEx and UPS have begun to create their own packages. So be sure that in your area, you find out if these types of packaging are available and how much they cost. Unfortunately, you may already know, UPS, DHL, and FedEx do provide free boxes and free envelopes and free sleeves to anyone that has an account. However, these specialized room temperature shipping and frozen temperature shipping boxes are not free. They are working to try to bring the cost down, and the cost may vary from country to country. So be sure you ask about the cost of these packages. And you have to be very specific. When you buy the packages, make sure you're clear about how many days in transit you expect your goods to be shipped, and also whether you want them kept at CRT, which is considered controlled room temperature, refrigerated, or frozen, because different packages will be available for those specifications. And one thing I didn't put on the slide, but just keep in mind that DHL also limits the amount and size of packages that can be shipped with dry ice. So let's get into that. There's a guideline for shipping dry ice. If you're going to do it, then you'll probably need to capture this. You can find it online, but here's just one example. If you're shipping small quantities, as an example, let's say 2 pounds, and if you expect the transit time to be at least 2 days, then you want to use 10 pounds of dry ice. If you're shipping 5 pounds, then you want to, make sure that you're using 15 pounds of dry ice if it's going to be shipped over a 2-day period. So this chart or a chart like this can be very helpful when you're planning whether or not to use dry ice and how much dry ice to use. I have a customer that ships food products, and they had to do some experimentation. Obviously, some of it is trial and error. You get friends or customers that are friendly or family members to receive packages with different amounts and different, quantities of dry ice, and you experiment with shipping it different ways, overnight or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, so that they can report back to you how fresh the goods were when they received them. So I would definitely recommend building that into your plan so that you can perfect it before you start offering that option to your customers. Now you can't see it very clearly at the bottom of this chart, but it says that if you're shipping larger quantities over, and if you think it's going to go more than 2 days, for instance, larger distances, then you want to add between 8 and 15 pounds for each day over 2 days. So that in itself will require that your package be larger to accommodate the additional dry ice. Now, I know in the US, we have lots of resources where they can actually deliver dry ice to your door. You can arrange it so that it arrives on the day that you plan to do your shipping, if you want to do it once or twice a week. And then depending on where you are, there are some places where you can go and pick up the dry ice locally. So it all, depends on how much you want to spend. Now, if you are planning to use dry ice, please keep in mind that it does require special labeling. If you are sending small packages that will be under 5.5 pounds. Now, again, let me just caveat that these regulations are US regulations. You do want to check with your local government to find out if your local dry ice shipping regulations are different. But as example, in the US, if it's less than 5.5 pounds, then you simply want to mark the words dry ice or carbon dioxide solid on the outside of the package. That's all you need to do. However, if you're shipping over 5.5 pounds of dry ice, then it does require a special label, which looks like this. It's called a diamond hazard label, and it falls under hazardous class 9 with the Department of Transportation. It's very easy to obtain this label. It's really not a big deal, but you just want to make sure that you do it so that you don't delay the packaging and cause it to be pulled off the assembly line. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that for international shipping, it does require what's called an ISC, which is International Special Commodities. There is a regulation that governs with carriers that ship overseas, that this has been approved for dry ice shipping. And again, it doesn't take much to get this approval. And I have, you'll find at the end of this, I have a resources page where I can give you the form that is required internationally for shipping dry ice. Now let's talk about size and how size impacts the cost of shipping. I mentioned volumetric or dimensional weight. You may have seen already when you ship something, you'll see in the quote on the shipping label where it will say, for instance, it's 5 pounds actual, but it may say 15 pounds dimensional. And what that means is that they're charging you for the size and not just the actual weight of the package. And there's a reason for this. This is because carriers have to account for every single inch in their cargo holds. And so the bigger a package is, then that means that's less space that they have to give to other customers. So even though you might think that, oh, well, my package is really tiny, so it shouldn't, I don't understand why it's that expensive. well, I mean, let me rephrase that. My package is really light. So I don't understand why it's so expensive. It's because your package may be taking up more room, and that's room that it's taking away from other customers. So that explains why they use this formula, which is called a dimensional weight calculation. And the way they do it is they multiply the length of the package times the width times the height, which is just to find the dimension of the package. And then if you're exporting, they use what's called a dim factor, which is the number that you divide by. So the dim factor, if you're exporting, is 139. And that is the typical dim factor that is used by the US Postal Service. It's used by FedEx, by UPS, and by DHL. It's a very common dim factor. However, it is arbitrary, and it is possible if you get into really, really large quantities of packaging that you can actually negotiate the dim factor so that your larger boxes don't cost as much. But it does require larger quantities, and sometimes your carrier can help you with that. Another thing to keep in mind is that after they do this calculation, length times width times height divided by 139, they will always round up to the nearest whole number. So don't worry about any fractions or decimal points. They're always going to charge you to the nearest rounded up number. Now for imports, it's different. If you're importing into your country, they always use the metric system. Of course, you know, everywhere except the United States, we use the metric system. It's the same calculation, length times width times height, except that the dim factor is divided by 5,000 instead of by 139. And also, we do use half numbers in imports. So they will round it up to 0.5. So if it's, for instance, if that calculation comes to 1.3, they will round it up to 1.5 rather than to the nearest whole number.
Okay, Dana, I want to stop for a second.
Mm-hmm.
One of the customer has a question. She's Lynn from Panama. She says she's shipping like 2 kilos of chocolate, but when coming from Panama to US, she tried FedEx and UPS. She didn't like, but she didn't have the luck. But with DHL, it was good. But she had to pay $150. That's a lot of money for 2 kilos of chocolate. So she's asking, is there any options or how? And also, she gave the box dimensions. It's about 21 by 22.5 by 11 centimeters. So that's a small box. It's not like a huge box because they are in centimeters. So do you have any suggestion for her what she can try based on all this import export? Does it include duties and taxes, or do you think it's so expensive?
Unfortunately, shipping costs almost everywhere are set based on your volumes. So if you were to it's just like anything else. If you go to the store and you're a consumer, then you're going to pay retail rate. It's the same thing in shipping. If you just go to FedEx or you go to UPS or you go to DHL and you don't have necessarily an account where you have negotiated a lower rate because you ship a high volume of packages, then unfortunately you're going to pay either retail or close to retail rate. So what I always suggest is to try to get with a partner or a broker that has the ability to combine the volumes of multiple companies together. It's kind of like a wholesale club, wholesale shopping. If you can get with a partner that can help you to combine your volumes along with lots and lots of other companies' volumes, then together you can bring the shipping costs down by using that type of account. And that's what companies like InExpress do.
So now let's say in Panama, if not that many people are shipping to US, can she ask the people receiving it to work with you or similar logistics companies in their area to reduce the shipping charges?
Yes, that's always an option. When shipping in and out of the United States, it doesn't matter whether it's importing or exporting, you still get the advantage of whatever discount has been negotiated in the United States. So if you have a partner or a customer or a distributor or a wholesaler inside the US, you can certainly get them to get an account. It doesn't, I'm not promoting an Express, but either with an Express or a company like an Express, to give you negotiated lower discounted rates. And then even if you are exporting, as an example, from Panama into the US, you can then use that negotiated US-based account number for your export. And that should be able to be a good way to bring your costs down. The only thing to keep in mind is that the paperwork will be, and the billing will be the responsibility of the account holder in the US. So as long as you have that type of arrangement with them, that might be a good option for bringing your costs down. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, she said thank you.
Okay, great. So now I wanted to get into some options for shipping inside the US. There's really not that many. There's just a few. One is the United States Postal Service. You have UPS, you have FedEx, you have truck freight. And truck freight comes in two ways. There is LTL, which is less than a truckload, and you have full truckloads. You have air cargo, which are private cargo lines that they don't ship people, all they ship is boxes. And then you have rail, which goes on trains. Other than that, these are the commercial modes of shipping inside the United States. Of course, there are private individuals and private companies that you can hire to ship for you, either by truck or by car. But these are the national companies that are most common. Now let's just talk for a minute about the United States Postal Service. I want everybody in the US to know that USPS shipping is almost always going to be the cheapest way to ship, almost always. However, there are some forces at play that may not make the Postal Service the best way to ship. And let's just talk about that for a second. Over the years, their profits have been down. As you know, this is a government agency. Over the years, people are sending less and less mail. And by mail, I mean, letter mail, flat mail and packages. People are not using the Postal Service as much to do that as they have in the past. However, the Postal Service is shipping more and more packages, and that's because of e-commerce. But they are not necessarily priced in such a way as to make money off of the packages, because they were born out of a need to ship flat mail. So for that reason, their profits are down. They have had to, they have fewer workers now. Their workers are not paid proportionately as well as they have been paid in the past. They have actually closed many of their USPS facilities, their postal facilities. So they have fewer warehouses and mail centers. However, they have almost doubled and tripled the number of mail boxes that they have. So they're collecting more mail, but their processing capability is lower. So what does that mean? That means that there are some bottlenecks and there's some delays in the US Postal Service. They're on average, 32% of their packages will deliver in about 4 to 5 days, which may be too long for mailing chocolates. Now, 68% of their packages deliver in 2 to 3 days. So that is a good thing. If you're mailing within the United States, and if your package does not need to be refrigerated, that could be a good option for you to keep the prices down currently. However, keep in mind that the Postal Service has announced that starting next year, they will continue to have price increases at least twice a year. Also, keep in mind that as of today, the Postal Service does not offer temperature controlled options that they guarantee. Now, you can certainly buy a styrofoam box and you could put it inside of a regular box. And you can, you didn't hear it from me, but you can put an ice pack in there. But they frown upon that, and they will ask you when you mail it if it contains an ice pack. So they're not really set up to support that. And all the research has shown that the US mail is just getting slower and more expensive overall. Now let's talk a little bit about UPS and FedEx. And just want to be clear, full transparency, I represent only UPS. I do not represent FedEx, but both of them are really good companies. They have specialties that differentiate them a little bit. They can both do expedited mail and next day and same day and overnight and 2-day mail, for instance. UPS tends to be better when it comes to their transit times, however. If you look at this chart, the purple represents FedEx and the brown represents UPS. And this is average calendar days in transit time by zone. And you know that inside the US, the map of the country is divided by zones. So the lower the number, so 2 represents closer zones and 8 would represent zones that are farther away, like shipping from the East Coast to the West Coast, as an example. So you can see that UPS and FedEx are about the same when it comes to shipping within the same zone, in the same region of the country. However, the farther out you ship, then that's where FedEx and UPS start to differ in terms of the amount of time it takes to get from one zone to the next. Now, keep in mind, this does vary from year to year because each company is constantly making improvements. And I think these numbers are based on, I think, last year or the year before. Now, for both companies, pickup can be arranged. They can pick up at your door no matter where you live, even if it's a remote area. They will charge a little bit. It's just a few dollars usually to pick up at your door. However, both FedEx and UPS do have drop-off facilities. And if you were to drop off your packages, then there's no charge for that. They also have some labels available, fragile labels, perishable labels, or even labels that say this side up if that's important. Sometimes if you have an account, you can get them to mail you those labels in advance, or you can pick them up at your local FedEx, Kinko's, or UPS store. Now, another way to ship inside the US other than FedEx and UPS is by truck, air, or freight. Now, obviously, this is just for larger quantities. So for instance, if you get to a point, and I know many of you have, where you're shipping to retailers or distributors or wholesalers, and it's too much for one box, one small package. So maybe it's too much for FedEx or UPS or DHL to pick up. Then you might want to consider shipping on a pallet. And that's where you put it on a pallet. It's going to be moved using either a pallet jack or a forklift, and it will be strapped down. Your multiple boxes, as you see in this picture, will be strapped down and or shrink wrapped to the pallet. And they do that just to make it easier for the machines to move them around. Now, once you get to these larger quantities, the shipping prices do go down. So a lot of times it might make sense, rather than shipping multiple small boxes to one location, to have a warehouse or a fulfillment center where you can ship multiple boxes on a pallet to the fulfillment center and then let them distribute for you. That's one way of saving on shipping costs. So when you do it as 1 or 2 or 3 pallets at a time. It's called LTL freight shipping, which stands for less than a truckload. And the reason that those prices are very, very, very affordable is because all of the trucks, the big 53-foot tractor trailers that you see on the road, they do not want to travel the roads empty or even partially full. Their goal is to always have their trailers full. So what they do is when they have extra space available in the trucks, they will sell that space at a discount. And that's called LTL shipping. So that's how you can really, really save when you get into palletfuls of packages. You can really bring your shipping costs down. Now, keep in mind, if we're talking about shipping refrigerated goods or something that needs to be temperature controlled, then that does require special types of trucks, like the one you see here. This is a temperature controlled truck. And the same thing holds for air freight. They would have to go into a temperature controlled container on an airline or on an air cargo airplane. So then, even though, you know, it's kind of a balancing act, you're saving money because you're shipping in bulk, but then if you need temperature control, then it's going to increase the costs. And the same thing goes for rail. If it's going on by train, they do have specialized temperature controlled containers. Here's an example of a container that has temperature control. And the blue arrows, I know you can't see them very well, but at the end of the container, you can see that there's a refrigeration unit that's it's built just like a refrigerator that keeps the entire container cold or cool. And then there are compartments within that container where you put the packages, and they will help to keep the temperature that you desire. You just have to be very, very open and communicative in advance about the type of the temperature that you need during your transit. Now, keep in mind when we're talking international travel, the only way to do that is by air or by ocean. So for small packages, your options are only DHL, UPS, FedEx, and the Postal Service, if it's the United States. Now, we've already kind of ruled out the Postal Service for shipping chocolate because they do not offer temperature control at this time. So if you're concerned about temperatures, that leaves only DHL, UPS, and FedEx for shipping small packages. Now, for international mail, they have their own guidelines, which are governed by the country that you're shipping from. So I would urge you to get familiar with your local country's guidelines. Now, those guidelines don't apply, and I know that a lot of people do this, if you are giving your goods to an individual to carry on a regular passenger airline. So then you're kind of at your own discretion. Just know that I have customers that do that from time to time as an option. You can save money that way, but you're left to the individual to carry those packages on board. But when it comes to international mail, once you get into shipping from each country, please, 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 I have included in the resources page at the end of this a guide that it's published by DHL, but it really applies to all carriers. There's a guide that you can actually look up your country, and it will tell you what some of the restrictions are for the country that you plan to ship to. So some just a few examples are, for instance, shipping to Anguilla. They require a pre-shipment inspection. Shipping to Japan, for instance, if you're importing cocoa beans are prohibited in Japan. I just looked that up and found that out yesterday. If you're shipping to Mexico, Mexico requires formal entry. And there's a technical letter for shipping cocoa or any type of food that's required to go with the package. And for Pakistan, as an example, you have to have a pre-alert for anything that is temperature controlled. And that's paperwork that's required to go into Pakistan. For Peru, as an example, there are weight restrictions for consumer goods. Like if you have a customer that is buying something off your website, it's an e-commerce shipment that's going to Peru, there are certain weight restrictions that can't be over a certain weight. However, if you're shipping commercial, there are other restrictions. So for every single country, you have to be very clear. Is this going to an individual? Is it commercial? Is it consumer? And what are the specific restrictions for that country? And I'm going to give you a guide, but keep in mind that the guide is published yearly. But if there are changes within the year, which there often are, it may not be reflected in the guide. So you still want to check with your local government or your carrier to double check any restrictions for the countries that you plan to ship to and from. Now, if you're importing into the United States, as an example, there is such a thing as prior notice for certain goods. If you're importing food, then the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, Food and Drug Administration, requires notice that you are shipping food. And in most cases, many carriers can actually file a lot of this paperwork on your behalf. So you don't need to worry about it. You just need to answer their questions and give you the information that they need. But again, it depends on the country and it depends on the carrier that you're using. So now let's talk about Incoterms. These are simply terms that govern the way exporters and importers work with each other. And these are the primary Incoterms that are used in import and export. So I just want to point out a few of them that are most common, things that you need to know. And this, some of them apply more so to shipping by ocean or by air versus by small package carriers. So for instance, CFR, which is cost, it stands for cost and freight. What that means, and all of these define the responsibilities of the seller and how they differ from the responsibilities of the receiver. And they also define the risks that the seller is willing to assume versus the risks that are assigned to the receiver. So for instance, CFR, cost and freight, means that the seller will load the goods onto whatever vessel they're using, but the seller's risk ends when the goods are loaded on board the vessel. CIF means the same thing, except that the seller is responsible for insuring the goods. Now, keep in mind that for all of these Incoterms that include insurance, it's only a minimum amount of insurance. Whatever that minimum amount is required is what the seller is required to do. If the buyer or the receiver wants more insurance, then it is the responsibility of the receiver to buy that additional insurance. So CPT is another example. That means the seller will deliver the goods all the way to the receiver's hands. So that means the seller is assuming responsibility all the way through until the receiver gets it. CIP, carriage and insurance, means the seller is assuming responsibility all the way to the receiver's hands, and they are including insurance of the goods. However, again, just like CIF, that is a minimum amount of insurance. It may or may not be enough to make the receiver happy. DDP is used more often when it's small packages, and these are automatic that can be told to your carrier, either DHL, FedEx, or UPS. DDP means that the seller will assume the responsibility of paying any applicable duties and taxes. So the duties and taxes are always assessed by the local government. The seller has nothing to do with the amount of duties and taxes. That is determined by your local government of the importer or the receiver. However, whatever that amount is, it will be billed back to the seller. That's what DDP means. DAP means the goods will be delivered at place, contingent upon the receiver paying those assessed duties and taxes. And with DAP, whoever the carrier is, they will typically notify the receiver in advance of the amount assessed of duties and taxes, and they will collect those duties and taxes either online or they'll tell you the best way for you to pay it. And then once those duties and taxes have been collected, then they will deliver the goods. The rest of them are pretty self-explanatory. Delivered at place unloaded means that they will deliver the goods. You will pay duties and taxes, but you are responsible for unloading the truck or unloading the container. FAS, these are less common, but they're used more often in very large shipments. Free alongside shipment means that the shipper will only deliver it to the port, but they are not responsible for getting it loaded onto the ship. The receiver or the receiver's broker will have to do that. Free on board means that the seller will get it all the way to the port and onto the ship, and then the receiver will take it from there. So I hope this helps. There's an actual guideline that I've put in the resources section where you can look at all of the details of each one of these Incoterms. Just keep that handy as a guide, but there's just a few that you will likely use for small packages. One thing I forgot to mention is that duties and taxes are a little bit of a gray area, as you may have learned. You may have found that you can ship the same exact package to the same exact place, and they will get assessed 2 different amounts of duties and taxes. Unfortunately, that's because it is often left up to the discretion of the examiner who opens the package and inspects it. They will determine if the goods match the paperwork. And if they determine in their own judgment that everything is in order, it matches the paperwork, they will just let it go on through. In some cases, it won't even be inspected. There are some countries that only do random inspections, like one every other package. Some do every 3 packages, some do every 10 packages. And depending on how busy they are, they may allow a whole slew of packages to go through without inspection. So that's why sometimes you can luck up and have your packages go through and, with the assumption that everything is in order and it's going to match the paperwork, and you will be assessed exactly what you expected to be assessed based on your paperwork. However, there are cases where the inspector will stop it, they'll inspect it, they will decide that, you know what, I don't like this. I don't think that what's inside the package matches what they have on the paperwork. And did you know that they have the right, and this varies from country to country, but in some countries, they have the right, if they think that you've said, for instance, if you have said that my goods are worth $20, they have the right to go online and look it up online. If they can find a retailer selling it for $150, they can assess that as the value of the package. They can say, nope, I don't believe it. It's not $20, it's $150. And that's why sometimes your duties and taxes may come in higher than what you had expected. But keep in mind, this has nothing to do with the carrier that's shipping it, and has nothing to do with the seller. This is all up to the local inspector and tax assessor in your local government. So let's talk a little bit about customs, getting through customs. And there's documentation that needs to be filled out, as you all know. I'm sure you've all done this before. And you've probably heard the terms pro forma document versus a commercial invoice. Now, I want to make this clear that when you're doing business with people in other countries, you can use a pro forma invoice. And that is merely a way for them to understand the value of the goods that you are proposing to sell. You can use a pro forma invoice to get them to review the details of what you're selling and to approve it and to give you permission to go ahead and finalize the deal. So a pro forma can it doesn't hurt to include a pro forma in with your shipment if that has already been negotiated and agreed upon between the seller and the buyer. However, a pro forma cannot take the place of a commercial invoice. A commercial invoice is required for international customs clearance. So even if in cases where, I know I might be jumping around a little bit, but I just want to drive home the fact that some people believe that, oh, well, it's just a sample. I just wanted them to get a taste of my chocolate. It's just a small quantity for them to sample. I'm not selling it to them. I'm just giving it to them because there's a potential that we might do future business. Or maybe it's a gift. It's a customer and I just want to thank them for their business, so I'm sending them a gift. It is a mischaracterization if you think that because you're sending a gift or a sample that you will not have to pay duties and taxes. That is not always true. Because again, it depends on the value that is assessed by the local inspector. So you never, ever, ever, and this is just training that we've received. There's a lot of gray area in there, but the training I've received is that you never want to put zero as the value of your goods that you're shipping internationally, even if it's a gift or a sample, because it's impossible for something to be worth nothing, right? So what you want to do is you want to put a value on it that can be substantiated. So for instance, if you're giving a gift or it's a sample, let's say that instead of, I would normally sell this for $50, but because it's a gift or a sample, it only cost me $10. Then that's the amount that you have to put on your commercial invoice. So you have to be very clear, because that's where a lot of people make mistakes and they end up getting their packages delayed in customs, or they end up having extra duties and taxes assessed. Because if it is not clear, if the inspector doesn't agree with it, then they have the right to assign whatever value that they want. So let's talk about how that is done. The value is the responsibility of the shipper, or the exporter is the one that assigns the value on the paperwork. So when you're shipping something, if you do it online, you either go online and you create your own paperwork, or you give it to your carrier and you allow them to do it for you. And every commodity is put into a different category when it comes to assigning value. And those categories are called harmonized codes, or harmonized tariff codes. And those are international codes that are used by every single country. Now, keep in mind that the first 4 digits of these harmonized tariff codes, or HTS codes, are typically the same for all countries. However, the number of digits and the numbers after the first 4 digits do vary from country to country. So, for instance, I looked it up, and in the United States, if we are shipping chocolate-related products, chocolate and foods containing cocoa, they fall under an HTS code 1806.32.9000. Now, the last few digits of that code may vary depending on the type of chocolate. If it's liquid, or if it's, for a consumer in a consumer pack, or if it's in bulk, or if it's one ingredient, that's where you get into the details of the last few digits. But the first 4 digits should always be 1806. And using Europe as an example, 1806 is also the first 4 digits. However, for chocolate and foods containing chocolate, the last 4 digits are 9039. So I just wanted to give those as examples. Your local HTS codes may vary, but just make sure that the first 4 digits are correct. And there are lots and lots of websites that you can go to online to look up these codes. I did put an example in the resources section for you to look at. Now, some of the information, here's this form that I have here on this slide is an example of a commercial invoice form. So some of the information that you have to put on the form are the name, address, and phone number of the shipper, then not just the company name, but the individual's name. And you should always include the phone number and email address. The reason for that is because if there's ever any problems and you want to avoid delays, they may need to get in touch with the shipper or the receiver. And they will do that in multiple ways. Sometimes they may call, sometimes they may send an email. So the more ways of communicating you can include on the paperwork, the less, chances for delay. You also want to include the actual address of the shipper and the receiver. You have to include the value of the goods, which we've already talked about. Now, we talked about gifts and samples, but let's talk about wholesale versus retail. If, for instance, you have a customer in another country and they are buying the goods from you for, I'm just going to use $100 as an example, but it only cost you $50 and you're making a $50 profit, then on the commercial invoice, keep in mind that you want to put the amount that that receiver will be assessed duties and taxes. And if there's ever a question, you will have to prove, or the receiver will have to prove by showing a copy of an invoice, how much they are paying for the goods. So that's why I would encourage you to use the retail rate on your commercial invoice, because if it's ever questioned, the receiver will be asked to show how much they are paying for the goods, not how much the wholesaler or the shipper paid for the cost of the goods. So hopefully that makes sense. It's also important to put the country of origin, and you want to be as specific as possible as to where the item was manufactured. That's important because some countries have restrictions on bringing in goods that originated in certain countries. That's why that's important. You have to say on the paperwork whether it's commercial or personal use. You have to say whether it's a gift or a sample. And a good way to do that, because there's not a lot of space, unfortunately, on this paperwork. You can put personal use only. You can put gift only in big letters. You can put samples only, just to call attention to that. And that'll increase the chances that your paperwork will be believed. And then in some cases, you will need an EEI number, an electronic export information number, or you can substitute your EIN number, which is your business license number, your company's business number. In the US, you can substitute your EIN. This is only needed typically in cases where the shipment is over $2,500, but $2,500 in value. However, that value amount may differ from country to country, so you do really need to know what that minimum amount is. You want to include a packing list or a manifest, and that is especially important in cases where your package includes more than one thing. And that's a protection for you as well as to get through customs, so that you can prove that, hey, I put 3 different items in there and when it arrived, it only had 2. So you want to make sure you take inventory of exactly the line item by line item, the number of things you put in that package. And if they are different, for instance, let's say you put 3 identical pieces of chocolate in there, then you can just describe that chocolate and put quantity 3 And then you still have to have the value of each individual piece of chocolate. So for instance, if they're $10 each and there's 3 of them, then you would put $10 quantity 3, so the total value would be $30 as an example. However, if you have multiple things on your package and they're different values, one is $10, one is $20, and one is $30, then you have to put those on separate line items. So the first line item would have a description of that product and you put $10 value. Second would have a description of that product, $20 value, etc. So I know it seems like a lot of work, but it's important for the commercial invoice to be as detailed as possible in order to avoid extra duties and taxes to be assessed, and in order to avoid delays. Your bill of lading is it's kind of like your shipping label that you will be given by the carrier once it's booked, and that will go on the outside of your package. It's a BOL if it's a large package that's being shipped by air cargo or by ocean. If it's a small package, it's called an airway bill or an AWB. Now, in terms of clearance, there are lots of ways, only 2 ways that you can have your items cleared through customs. Either your receiver is responsible for customs clearance as the importer of the goods, or the shipper can contract with a carrier to be responsible for customs clearance. And many shippers, like the small package shippers, DHL, UPS, and FedEx, for instance, they have their own in-house customs clearance brokers that actually sit in the office. They actually sit in the customs clearance office in the country of the importer. So they can actually help with customs clearance. So the receiver really very seldom has to get involved unless they're paying for duties and taxes, or unless there's a question about what's in the package not matching up with what's in the paperwork. Now, DHL and UPS both have what they call clearance in the air. And that means that they will review the paperwork even before the package arrives at its destination. So by the time it arrives, they've already reviewed the paperwork, they've assessed, they've approved it, they see that it's in order. And so it's just a rubber stamp. When the inspector gets it, they decide whether or not they want to open it. And then they rubber stamp. DHL, UPS has already looked at it, it's already approved. So that really helps the clearance process to go through more quickly. And the same thing is available with certain freight carriers. It depends on the freight. If you're shipping by ocean or by air, certain freight carriers can do the same thing for you. Now, keep in mind that it does vary by country. For instance, importing into Mexico is very different. As of right now, as far as I know, the Mexican government has a requirement that, especially for larger shipments, that a local broker must be involved in receiving those goods. And the same thing may apply to other countries. So make sure you check on your importing country to see what their local requirements are. For Canada, as another example, they require what they call a shipping power of attorney to be signed for local shipments. So again, depending on the carrier, some carriers can handle that for you. Sometimes you might have to have a Canadian broker to make sure that shipping power of attorney is in place. So I hope that helps. Now let's talk about duties and taxes being assessed. Every country has what they call, I'm sorry, was there a question?
Oh, 1 second, Dan. I think somebody asked some question on Mexico, so I thought we can just ask before we go to the other part. I will read the question. Okay. So she is exporting, Arturo. They are exporting from Mexico to US or Europe, and then they're asking, are there any labeling language standards? They put the labels in Spanish. So is there any resource that they can go look at? How do they have to label them?
Oh, that is an excellent question. From Mexico to Europe
Europe or US, both?
or US? That is an excellent question. If you could, especially from a language perspective, I'm not sure, but I'm happy to look into that for you. It may actually be detailed in this guide that's in the resources section by country. But if it's not in there, I'm happy to research that for you. So if you would send me that note offline, I'll look into it.
Okay. The other question is from Aaron Sylvester. He has sent some packages to US which has been inspected, pierced with the probe, damaging the chocolate. How can we avoid this? All the paperwork was correct as far as he was aware.
I'm sorry, who damaged the chocolate?
I think maybe when they inspected, when they bought or they inspected, looks like it was pierced with a probe. And when they pierced with the probe, it damaged the chocolate.
Oh my goodness.
And so
Um,
we put all the paperwork correct as far as I was aware. So how to avoid it?
yes. You know, unfortunately, there's no foolproof way to avoid things like that happening, but I would just recommend, it sounds like you already did it. Make sure you put fragile on the outside. Make sure you put in the notes section of the paperwork. Do not use probes, you know, things like that. That will not guarantee that they won't use them. But the only other thing you can do is to make sure you have insurance to cover that. That's very sad when that happens. I have heard of that. It's unfortunate that some inspectors do not take as much care as others.
Yeah, Lynn Bishop says she also leaves the chocolate like without packaging, so unwrapped. She sends the bars. Oh yeah, okay. She had the bars unwrapped. Maybe like the customs unwrapped the bars. Okay.
Okay. And again, that's where that gray area comes in, because it's totally up to the inspector to decide if they need to unwrap. And normally I can tell you, if your paperwork is in order and it's believable and everything is done, you know, well, then that will diminish the chances that they will unwrap your packages. It's usually only when the paperwork doesn't look right that they may unwrap the package because they're a little bit suspicious. But unfortunately, unfortunately, some inspectors take their jobs a little too seriously, and they do too much. So I wish there were a way to avoid that. And some countries are worse than other countries, and some people are worse than others. It's really at the individual level. Can you give me a quick time check? I know that we've been going a while, but we're almost at the end.
Yeah,
We're
I think
good?
we can.
Okay.
Only thing is,
So,
I have to just tell all the participants, don't be shy. Please ask any question that you have.
okay, great. Really important, I wanted to make sure that we understand why duties and taxes are assessed, because they are a pain. They are a pain in the butt. And a lot of times, duties and taxes can cost more than the actual product. That's just the way it is. But there are some good reasons why some countries assess such high duties and taxes. First of all, you need to know that the amount that can be assessed varies from country to country. It's called de minimis value. The de minimis value is the minimum amount below which a country is not allowed to assess duties and taxes. So for instance, the de minimis value in the United States is $800. If you import something into the United States and the value is under $800, it will most likely not be assessed any duties and taxes, because $800 is the US de minimis value. Now, there are exceptions to that. It depends, for instance, if it's electronics or if it's, computers or cell phones, that might differ. So you want to find out what is the de minimis value for that country for your commodity before you ship. The de minimis value, for instance, in Canada is $20. So it's much, much, much lower. So you can almost always know that you will have duties and taxes assessed in Canada. So, but the reason for duties and taxes are to protect the local government. You know, if you're bringing in something that they think is a threat to some local companies that sell the same product, or if they think you're taking jobs away from the local economy, then that will contribute to their formula for assessing duties and taxes. They also want to protect consumer interest. So for instance, if they think it's dangerous or if it's not good for their local citizens, which, as you know, it varies from country to country. You know, if it's something that they think is not good for their citizens, they will attach more duties and taxes. If they have a new industry, and chocolate is a good example. Let's say they have several new companies that have just launched and they're starting a new craft chocolate industry in that country, then the local government may decide to increase the duties and taxes for craft chocolate in that, you know, being imported into that country, because that's a way to protect their local craft chocolate industry. And then another reason for duties and taxes is for national security, to protect national security. And it's also used as a political tool. So we have certain countries that are on, you know, restricted lists, and you can still import and export with these countries, but the duties and taxes will be much higher because the government wants to kind of discourage businesses from doing business with these countries. So there are lots and lots of reasons for duties and taxes, but the main takeaway is that it has nothing to do with the seller or the carrier. And then this is just to show that there's different types, that the difference between duties and taxes. So the main thing to keep in mind is that taxes are direct taxes on the goods, and duties are taxed on the consumers or the importers. That's the main difference. Sometimes you may have duties that are low and tariffs that are high, and you could have tariffs that are low and duties that are high. It will vary based on the commodity and based on the country. And then lastly, I just wanted to urge you to consider buying optional insurance. As you know, a lot of the carriers include what they call declared value. DHL, UPS, and FedEx includes up to $100 in value. But in that case, they will assess the value of the product if you file a claim. If you believe that your value is greater than $100, then it only costs a few dollars to buy insurance for anything greater than $100. And in that case, if you have a claim, then it's up to you to prove the value of your products. And the same thing goes for truck and ocean and air freight. Don't rely on the carrier's liability. I would always urge you to buy your own insurance you can buy it through the carrier or through, you know, a third party. And that's because your own insurance will believe you when you say you had a claim, and you won't have to jump through as many hoops in order to prove the damage or the loss. Keep in mind that there is a limited time to file a claim. In a lot of cases, you only have 30 days, or in some cases, you only have 5 days to notify the carrier that there was a claim. You have to make sure you can prove that it was professionally packed, because if they look at the packaging and they decide that you were not careful in the way you packaged it, they will not approve your claim. So for that reason, you want to make sure you always take pictures. Tell your receiver or your importer to always take pictures of the package, the way it arrived, and take pictures of the items inside the package. And keep the package and keep the items, because very often the carriers will want to inspect the items. It's unfortunate that they will not just take your word for it, and they may not just go by the photographs. Sometimes if it's a higher dollar value, I would say if it's over like $300, $400, $500 in claim, then they may require an inspection of the packaging and the item before they will approve your claim. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you document everything. And unfortunately, it can take them forever to process your claim. It could be as much as 6 months to 12 months before you get the check. It's unfortunate, but they're very slow in processing. So that's all I had. Here's a list of all of the resources that are available to you that I'm willing to share. If it has a hyperlink, if it's in green, that means you can just click through it. When CocoTown sends you a copy of the presentation, you'll be able to just click through it and go straight to this guide online. However, if it says upon request, that means it's in the form of a PDF. And if you would contact me, I'd be happy to send you that PDF. So here's my contact information. Reach out to me at any time. Please do follow me on social media if you are on Instagram or Facebook, and I'm here to help answer any questions you may have.